Dr. Randy Mills and Roxanne Mills, both of them retired teachers from Oakland City University, English and history, right? So they're going to talk about the unexpected journey, a Marine Corps Reserve company in the Korean War, and they're going to talk for 35 minutes or so, and then you guys can ask questions. You're supposed to read that article, right? So you can ask some good questions of them, but go ahead and thank you for coming. Speak to our class.
Okay. Can you hear me okay without the microphone? Okay. Randy and I wrote this book together. There's another one we wrote together too, and he's got several others. That's the book itself as it first came out. A lot of times people ask me, how do two people write a book together? And, you know, did you fight and stuff like that? But we had a great time, really. We got to meet these wonderful people he's going to talk about, and they welcomed us into their homes and into their lives and their memories, more or less. So that was a great experience overall. One thing that's kind of funny is this group of guys assumed that I wrote it all for some reason.
They thought I was an idiot.
But he actually wrote about 2/3 of it, and I wrote about 1/3 of it. And we were able to kind of divide up the areas that we wanted to cover. So it was really a great experience. So he's going to share some things with you about the story.
The story that she's speaking of is our book, Unexpected Journey. And that book looked at a Marine Corps Rifle Reserve Company here from Evansville that went overseas and fought in the Korean War. It's interesting to me, and I was wrestling around how I wanted to present it to you as straight history, and here's the Korean War, and here's what was going on, and that sort of thing. And I thought, you know, it's fascinating, and this is what I'm going to really emphasize, what happens when you write a book, especially when you write a book about local history. And I'm going to talk about, that adventure. Our sources, we found survivors of this company, and they met once a month. We'll talk about how we came across that group. So now we've got people to talk to. So we did interviews, and one of the interesting things about interviews, when you first talk to somebody, and I've written 4 combat history books about combat soldiers, and this is true of all my interviews with combat soldiers, that the first time you talk to them, they'll give you very little information, and they'll tell a lot of funny stories. And the second time you talk to them, they'll give you more information, a little more relaxed. The third time, they'll start telling you the stories. And the fourth time, they'll start telling you stories that you have to turn the tape recorder off. Things they saw, things they did, things that happened to them that they just can't talk about, but now they're ready. That's the other thing about talking to people at this age. When people are around 50 years of age, they're ready to be interviewed, they're ready to talk. I don't know what that is. I suspect it's, gee, I'm 50 and what's my life been? So they start looking back. I did of all things, a memoir when I played basketball 50 years ago, just recently. And I realized, gee, this is in Southern Indiana, basketball is a big deal. And I did a book, it's coming out on Larry Bird's high school days. Same thing, all those guys are ready to talk now. So that's kind of an interesting phenomenon here with this particular bunch. So when you think about teaching history, and when I teach history, you can look from a telescope and look at the real big picture, or you can look at a microscope at some small piece of it. And it's that microscope that's more personal, speaks to you, you'll start dreaming about it. I had to quit writing combat stories because I was getting nightmares from the things I was hearing. So combat is probably one of the most traumatic things that can happen to a young person. They're not ready for it. I don't know who could be ready for it, but they're certainly not. So we get into that. The other thing that's interesting to me about this, and Roxanne and I have talked about it, is the odd occurrences that started happening when we started gathering research for the book. I want to fast forward a little bit to about a year ago to tell you that that's still going on with that story. Now, I'm a skeptic and I'm a rationalist, and I don't know what to do with what I'm about to tell you and the other things like this that happened. But I had gone to Lincoln's Boyhood National Memorial over by Santa Claus, and I was walking out the trails. It was in late winter, pretty nice day. And next to the cabin there was a field that they'd plow up to put stuff in to show what the pioneers grew. So I looked down there and saw some old crockery. I thought, oh gee, this could be Lincoln Crockford. So nobody's around. I'm sitting there picking it up, putting it in my pocket. Well, this young guy comes. He's got on a little uniform that he's working there. And he says, what are you doing here? And I said, oh, I was a professor at the time. I said, I'm looking through this stuff here. Look at all this pottery. And I just gave it to him. And then he said, oh, he said, have you written anything? And I was telling him about my military histories and how we interviewed common people. And he said, you know, that must be really neat to give those stories to those families. And I said, yeah, but they're all dead but one guy. They're all gone. These were dear friends of ours that we were with, and they shared some of their deepest secrets. And as I said that, I saw three people coming up the trail. An older guy, a guy that looked like a son, and a little boy that looked like a grandson. And the closer he got, the more I realized, that's the guy that's still alive. What are the chances of that? It's Warren County. Carl Barnett, Steve, if you remember Carl. So those kinds of odd things, and I'll mention some of them, are going on here during this time. So I guess this story discovered us rather than we discovered the story. In 1989, Roxanne and I, we were blending a family. She had two sweet little girls and I had two sweet little boys. And we'd purchased a house in Oakland City. And the lady that sold it to us had lived there 64 years. She'd raised 4 kids there. We didn't know if we could meet the amount she wanted, but the realtor told me later, after she saw us and our 4 kids, she said, I want them to get this house. So the day that Garnet Fitch left that house, I watched her. I watched her go from room to room, touching walls, and talking to those walls. And that struck a chord with me. And there was one room that was kind of different. A lot of stuff was left there. I thought, why didn't this stuff get moved? Later on, when my sons ended up in that room, one day my oldest Ryan came to me and he said, Dad, what's this picture? There's the house there. And if you want to go to the next one. So one of my sons found this picture. And it was laying in a place where there hadn't been anything else before. And I said, where'd you get this? And he said, I got it from right there. And I said, no, you didn't. You know, I cleaned up everything. And he said, well, it was here. So we couldn't figure out who those guys were. I just framed it and put it on my mantle because that looked, it just spoke to me, kind of vibrated with something. I didn't understand why. Fast forward, I don't know, 2 weeks later, I'm sitting in my recliner in front of our picture window, looking out at a pretty nice scene there in the curve in Oakland City, in the nicer parts of the small town. And there's a guy looking through my window. Older guy. I say older, he's probably 10 years younger than I am now, but at that time he was older. So I go out there and I said, can I help you? And he said, oh, I'm sorry, my name's Gordon Green. I'm a professor at the University of Nebraska in Omaha, but I grew up here. And this was my best friend's house, and I just wanted to come by and see where he used to play football and stuff like that. And I said, wait a minute, you might know who's in this picture. So I ran out and showed him this picture, and he kept saying, where'd you get this? Where'd you get this? I've never seen this before. Where'd you get this? And I said, well, I found it in the house. And he said, I don't remember this picture being taken. This is Gordon Green. This is the boy that lived in our house, Gordon Fitch. And all these boys are from Oakland City. And they were part of Company C, Marine Corps Reserve Company here from Evansville, Indiana. So Gordon got us, and of course I started interviewing him because I thought it could be a good story here. He told me, he got me in contact with another guy in town, Bill Marshall, who's this little guy here. He was 16 years old when he joined, and you had to get somebody, a family member, to sign for it, so he asked his deaf uncle, who didn't know what he was signing, so he could get in the Marine Corps Reserve. We'll talk about that kind of stuff here in just a moment. So now we're talking to this whole group, and now I'm doing interviews, but I've got something else that's wonderful. Letters. Letters, people don't write letters anymore. Letters are time machines. They're real-time records, accounts of what's going on. So there's letters back and forth between parents to these guys. There's letters between the guys. There's letters from the guys back to the guys in Korea back to the guys back in Oakland City. Those are funny because the guys from Korea are talking about all their action in Japan, where they're at before they go over to Korea, and they're telling these guys back in Oakland City things I don't think are physically possible. But anyway, not everything got in the book. You have that going on. So, if you want to go to the next one. Lenny? Okay. I want to back off here just a little bit and talk about what was going on. Okay, so that's the microscope. Let's do the telescope. So how did these guys get in the Marine Corps Reserve? In fact, the Marine Corps Reserve didn't exist until 1947. So there's a really interesting story here, because when you think of the Marine Corps, you think of an elite group, right? I guess it would be, what would it be today? Navy SEALs or something like that. But in that day, a Marine Corps person was top elite kind of military person in this country. So at the end of World War II in 1945, and it's fascinating to me how things can be happening all over the world among people that lead nations, and lay out the history that's going to affect everybody, how that flows down to Oakland City, Indiana. But it does. There's a connection there. And that's part of the fun of writing. You see those connections, you realize, while these guys are doing this, here's all this stuff that's going to come and kill some of them and change their lives forever. So at the end of World War II, after the Allies, the United States, England, France, and the Soviet Union had defeated Germany, Italy, and Japan, this is what the scene looked like. So the Soviet Union was in possession of this area here, and this was the area where the French and the Americans and the English were. And the idea was to let people vote and decide what they wanted to do, a choice of where the direction they wanted to do and go. Well, by 1946, we saw the Soviet Union, they weren't going to do that. They were going to hang on to all this. And you could probably have thrown Yugoslavia in that. That had Tito, and he was kind of a communist, but he was his own guy. But even he followed the line of the Soviet Union. Wow. When World War II ended, we figured, we'll never have another war like that. Now all of a sudden the tension is starting to rise because the international communism declared that they wanted that to be worldwide. And so they were going and stirring up these nations. So in response, in places like West Germany and so forth, and Italy, Greece, these places that were apt to go communist, we started the Marshall Plan. Perhaps you've talked about the Marshall Plan. But that was aid to help these people so they wouldn't be as vulnerable to communist takeover. If you go to the next one, Korea, between China and Russia and Japan, the Koreans had a saying, they were shrimp between whales, had been divided at the end of World War II because there was Russian influence over this northern part of Korea. So that's the 38th parallel. There's some irony there. Do you know where the 30th parallel runs?
Runs through
Diamond Avenue is the 37th parallel. And I see on 69 it's the 37th parallel as well. So how ironic, another odd thing here in our story that our people from our place would go and struggle there and be traumatized, and some of them would die. So this was done in 45. We did not we had American troops here. We did not let them have their own army because we didn't want a war to start between North and South Korea. So they had kind of a quasi-police military kind of thing going on. And then we had Americans stationed in occupied Japan. Those guys, by the late 1940s, were very relaxed. There wasn't seemingly any war that was going to be going on. It was the most fun for a young guy that liked a lot of adventure, just put it that way, with what was going on. I've done a book on Larry Bird on his high school basketball days. And when I was giving a talk the other day in the Jasper Library, a guy walked up to me and he started showing me pictures of Larry's father. And he was in Korea during this time. And these young men, these pictures to me are beautiful because they're so young, they look so innocent, they got their pistols stuck right there like bandoleros or something, you know, they just look cocky as all get out. He would suffer tremendous trauma and bring that home, and it would affect Larry Bird's family to a great, great degree. In fact, he would take his own life February 75. Part of it probably because of the trauma of the Korean War. And he talked about it. I think he had to take a North Korean's life, as I recall, in his story. So, another thing going on while this was happening was what was happening to the Marine Corps. So, at the end of World War II, we'd spent so much money, and people were so tired of not having new appliances. The cars didn't change. You know, for all the time of the war, it was the same car. If you bought a 43, 40, it didn't matter. They were all the same car. Nothing was new going on in that system. So Americans were ready to become consumers again, and the troops were coming back looking for jobs. And one of the things the government decided to do was to demobilize, make the Army much, much stronger. It's expensive to have an Army. You don't need one now. So in 1947, they decided to end the Marine Corps. How many of you knew that? Can you imagine ending the Marine Corps? They're going to make it a part of the Navy in a very small group. Because what are Marines used for? They go and take the beaches. So we don't need that anymore. So the Marine Corps Commandant just got really, really upset. And he said, let's make a deal. Keep the Marine Corps, have less of it, and then create a Marine Corps Reserve System. So in 1947, 120 cities were chosen to have Marine Corps companies. And Evansville had Company C. I think in a company, maybe 150, Steve, in a company, probably. And maybe a little more, you could probably have extra there in a case like that. So that was all well and good if you could pop it there. So Torian's insurance on Lloyd, you seen it? Oh, it's by the it's by the Reserve Training Army Reserve Training place. This is he becomes Colonel Torian. He becomes the head of Company C in 1947. He was a decorated World War II Marine, and they started recruiting people. A lot of the people that came were veterans of World War II. They liked the camaraderie of World War II. They missed talking with their buddies about the war, the fun part. And so that brought in some people, but they were still short. So Torian got this idea. He went to 4 coaches in the 4 high schools at the time in Evansville, and he said, bring in your athletes. So they recruited their athletes. Now these guys all had to get their, in most cases, had to get their parents to sign for them. Were parents going to do this after seeing the carnage of World War II? Yeah, because there wasn't going to be another war. And they could quit any time they wanted. They didn't read the fine detailed line, except in time of national emergency. Could be any national emergencies. So in 47, you started getting these young guys coming in. Now, they got paid for weekends there, for training, but they didn't have to go. They got to wear Marine Corps uniforms coming and going, and they could go in taverns legally if they were underage, because during World War II, it was kind of a practice thing that, hey, this guy could get killed in war. You got to let him come in here in the tavern, be here. They got to, wear the Marine Corps uniforms, and that was a big deal back then, because the military was still revered. And so, pick up some girls maybe doing that. They had to do summer training, but they didn't have to go. They were paid for all that, and the older ones were wise enough to go because they got extra money. And in that day and age, that was a nice little thing. They went out to a couple of bases out on the East Coast, and then I think the Mississippi River, those guys went over to the West Coast into San Diego to train. So it was tough training. We want to go to the next one. So you start seeing people join. Next one. So here's some guys that went to the training, summer training. That guy's got a bayonet, and he's one of our Evansville guys. So you see, there was quite a bit of goofing off there too. So it was hit and miss during this time. No one saw it coming. June 28, 1950. If you go back to that map, just a moment, I'll use that as a reference. 95,000 well-trained, trained by the Soviets, and weaponized by the Soviets. They had tanks. They had the newest model of tanks that when we started fighting them, our bazookas, the bazooka shells would bounce off because they were at angles. Came barreling in to Korea, to South Korea. And all the Koreans had was that paramilitary group of constables and things like that. Why did the North Koreans do that? So they had to get permission from the Soviets. And the Soviets said, it's okay if we think that the Americans aren't going to do anything about it. In 1946, 1947, the Americans, the intelligence agency, and the leaders of the country decided to create a containment policy. The domino theory, how many are familiar with that? Okay, so that's a policy of we've got to stop communism, it's going to spread, or dominoes. If this one goes, this one goes, this one goes. However, in a public statement when the United States listed all the places that they would defend. Korea wasn't on it. I do not know why, but that was the case. And so now Truman, President Truman's stuck with a big mess because this came out of nowhere. I mean, nobody saw this coming. If you go back, now just keep going here. Okay, so here's a paper. I think this is an Evansville newspaper here. And if you see how the North Koreans are moving in, and way down here becomes the last bastion of hanging on. So the North Koreans drive the Americans and the South Koreans all the way to this little bitty corner called Pusan perimeter. And there's a short enough line there to defend that they're able to stop the North Koreans, but only for a while. How many are familiar with Dunkirk? Dunkirk's the famous battle where the English, looked like the English army was going to be wiped out during World War II, and for whatever reason, Hitler just kind of let him go back. I think he thought England would give up and make peace. So Dunkirk, it was said that Pusan was going to be another Dunkirk, that they were going to be trapped there. In this case, they were going to be wiped out. So Truman decided to commit. He went to the United Nations. By the way, the United Nations was new, started in 45, 46, still had teeth. So that meant there would be all the United Nation countries, and most of them could help out. So it just wasn't the United States, it was the United Nations effort. And they declared that they would fight against them. Now, war was not declared. What was declared was a national emergency. Damn. I call this phase one. Oh no, we're going to lose. Remember that. Phase one. Oh no, we're going to lose. So, if you can go back, there's another, yeah, right here. So here's Incheon. You can see the Busan perimeter here. You see the North Koreans. Incheon's over here. Incheon's a seaport, and it has the second highest tide in the world. You can only land a ship there and unload it, I think, maybe 2 or 3 days out of the month. And the rest of it is a big mud flat there during that time that the tide's not in. So Truman went to Douglas MacArthur, who was the architect of winning the war in the Pacific, General MacArthur, and said, come up with a plan. And he did. He said, we will invade at Incheon, surprise, get behind their lines and cut them off, and that'll be it. Great. Wait a minute. They're going to land? They're going to have a landing? Who does the landing? Who secures the landing? Marines. Wait a minute. We don't have the full Marine. We've got the reserves. Next one. Right here. Called to duty. None of them could get out. There's a guy, Bill Marshall's mom, she was really mad because he's the one, he'd gone to his uncle who was deaf and signed for him to go. He was 16 years old, maybe 17 by then, but he was. And back then you could write the president, you could write famous columnists and people on the radio and stuff, and they would answer you back. So she wrote everybody saying, you can't do this, you can't do this. And finally the commandant of the Marine Corps wrote and said, lady, we can't win a war if you don't leave us alone. So Bill Marshall, he had to go too. The next one, please, Roxanne. So they were told, the Marine Corps Reserve were told, and their parents were told, that they would have 2 months training out at Fort Pendleton in California before they would see combat. The first, so here are the guys from Oklahoma City. Before they left, they got together, and some of them won't be there to retake the picture after the war. Next. This is Marnie Martyr, and they lived They had a house across from the, was the old ad building at Oakland City College. In fact, you had an office there, didn't you? And Charlie was, his dad was an engineer at one of the coal mines, big coal mines. And he had, Barney had worked there with his dad and learned to do engineering stuff. And later on, when the Marines were surrounded in Korea and the Oakland City guys at the Chosin Reservoir, they were trying to build an airfield in. They had this little perimeter of this one base at UWD, and nobody knew how to set the stakes. And Barney set the stakes that allowed them to build the landing space that kept them alive. There's a nugget, there's a dot that I connected, and Roxanne and I did, that nobody ever knew about. And he talked about it in his letters. So that was just fascinating to me, how some guy from Oakland City, whose story's been forgotten and he didn't even realize what he had accomplished, and you put that on the map. Okay, next please. September 28, 1950, train station. There they are. You can't see very well in this picture, but if it was sharper, you could see the look on the mothers' faces. And then they're walking up the side of the train. Next. And there's a proud mother looking at her son. That's her son there. Next. And there's the guys at the Illinois station, the guys from Oakland City. That's where that picture was taken. He sees combat, he sees combat, he sees combat, and he sees combat, and he sees combat. In fact, he's almost killed. I think he has a scar all the way down. I got a picture of that when he's in the hospital. Next. September the 2nd, when they arrive at Camp Pendleton. There they are. Not only from Evansville, Warren County, Gibson County, Pike County, Perry County, maybe even down into Henderson, Owensboro, Kentucky. I think Bud Fitch, you can see this more plainly, you can spot him in the back. And the four coaches are right up here. Only one of the coaches, Tex Graham, any of you familiar with Evansville sports, Tex Graham from Princeton, he was at Central, was the only one that went over there and fought. And his wife was always mad at the other guys that somehow got out over. Next, please. So here they are getting to Fort Pendleton. Next. Here they are relaxing while they're out in the field. Next. This is an interesting picture. This guy worked for the post office, and then his father was the postmaster of Evansville for a while, and the head of the postal union in Evansville. I think he led the parade one year, the Labor Day parade. But this guy will become, the taller of the boys, will become the leading scorer in Indiana basketball high school in 1962, the leading scorer in the nation in 1966 at Purdue, first round draft choice of the NBA. Who is this guy? Any North High School people here? It's Dave Shellhouse. So that's Dave's little brother, and that's Dave Sr. So, and these are all people we got to meet with. There's an Oakland City guy getting ready to go over. Okay, 6 months, right? 2 months before they go to fight. The first group of Evansville guys, not all of them, but the first group that went over after 2 weeks on a plane, not on a boat, because they were flown in for that Incheon invasion, and they landed at Kempo Airport, which is right outside of Incheon, and then they were part of liberating Seoul, the capital of South Korea. Next, please. We now enter phase 2 of the war. Oh my gosh, we're going to win. So the question was, we pushed them out of South Korea. What are we going to do now? MacArthur convinced Truman to go ahead and take all of North Korea, even though that treaty after World War II had set it apart. MacArthur was very aggressive. He wanted to use nuclear weapons later on. So that was decided to be done. So there were actually two thrusts into North Korea. On this side was the Army, and on this side were the Marines. And they landed down here at Wonsan. Next one, please. So at Wonsan, they had 3 perimeters as they marched up a single lane road through the mountains with cliffs on the side in many cases. This was like the middle of nowhere. And it was mountainous, and then up here on a plateau was the chosen reservoir. And so here's Chin Chung Nai, Coda Reed, Haggerty, and New Damney. This is as far as the Marine Corps got as they made their way up. So this is in October and November and into early December. And they had kind of a, what we would call an Indian summer, you know, where after a real hard fall, I don't even know where they have those things anymore out, as warm as it is. But after the frost, they're usually a time of real clear skies and warm weather, kind of summery-like, and that's called Indian summer. So a lot of them commented about that in their letters, how nice it was.
10:31.
Okay, thank you. So they got up there, and nobody saw this coming, but 140,000, there were 14,000 Marines on this side, 140,000 Chinese suddenly appeared and came into the war out of nowhere. Now we got the Chinese to mess with, and also that could lead to a bigger war. They also came in on this side too. Probably 150,000 on this side. How they missed that, I do not know. That's what happened. So in the Marine Corps, this is the chosen reservoir. Have you ever seen the movie Born on the 4th of July? Where they're recruiting kids for the Vietnam War, and they're going to this high school. There's this Marine Corps guy standing up there. He's got scars all over his face. And he starts mentioning all the Iwo Jima, Tripoli, the frozen chosen. It's an archetype story from the Marine Corps. They didn't win, but they destroyed the Chinese. All the Chinese that were fighting here were actually knocked out of the war, but they had to fight their way back. So they used these perimeters. The Udam League people came down to Hagaru. This is why it was so important that Barnard had helped get a little place where they could land planes. Then down to Coterie and down to here, and then on to Wonsan. So that was going on during that time. Next, please. So here's some quick pictures of them when they were up north. Next. You can see that's Phil Wright. I think his son taught in the Evansville school system at one time. But a nice guy. He just died in 2020, 94 years old. Nice guy. Next. You can see how deep the snow was. Next. Hugh McGarrett, or Raleigh McGarrett, right, sweet guy. Yeah, he had a lot of letters he wrote to his wife, and those were really sweet. Next. Okay, so now we come to the 4th stage. Crap, nobody's going to win. The Chinese discovered what we had discovered going that way. They couldn't protect their lines. And so basically the 38-37 parallel became the place where both sides ended up stopping, and neither one could push the other one back without starting a full-scale nuclear war, which the Americans weren't willing to do. And so the war went on, that was in 51, 3 more years. Thousands more people dying during that time for a war that moved very little. It's like trench warfare during World War II. I'm going to jump real quick to the room in our house. So I recognized, okay, well, go back up just a little bit more. So this is Bud Fitch, lived in our house. Next. And then these are pictures of the guys that were fighting during that, from the Evansville group that was fighting during that period of stagnant war. I believe that guy's going to the bathroom. I think believe in himself. Next. And there they are camping out in the rice paddy. Next. There's another guy. Next is a picture I really like. Here's another Evansville guy. Look, he's a baby. He's smoking a cigarette. Look how he's got his pistol. It's just such a, to me, an iconic picture of how young these guys are and how much they wanted to be brave soldiers. In his first battle, they were being shot at and he couldn't find any cover. The Koreans kept their human waste in the ground in these big vats. I mean, you could stand in them. He stepped in one, trying to keep out of the line of fire, and got covered with human excrement. When he came out, nobody would let him get behind the tree with him because he stunk so bad. And he was crying. He said, please, please. He said, nah. But anyway, he made it. Next. Bill Wright. So Bill Wright was tender-hearted. One of the sweetest guys I ever met. So many of these Americans came across these orphan kids. It was tens of thousands of kids without parents or grandparents or anything, just running around starving. And in the books I've written about the Korean War, I've got more than one picture like this where somebody picked up a kid and toted him around and fed him to keep him alive. But in every case that I looked at, they ended up dying because they had to take it with them. They get killed in by mortars or get diseases or whatever. So that's what this picture is. Next. Okay, I want to read real quickly and then we'll ask questions. I want to go back to the Bud Fitch story. So I said that I'd seen that room before, a room like that before, back where I grew up in Southern Illinois. You would find rooms like that where somebody had lost a son or daughter, usually when they were teenagers, and they would leave their room exactly the way it was. It was a museum for them to let their child have a presence. And that's part of what Garnet Fitch was talking to when she left that house. Not only the good times and the Christmases and so forth, but also the loss of her son. She made Gordon Green almost guilty beyond belief because Gordon's the one that got him to join. Gordon told us that story. And she's mad at Truman, she was mad at MacArthur, she's mad at everybody. And who can blame her? The family had letters. And we really wanted those letters because Bud Fitch was going to be the center of the story. So they got together and she said, okay, everybody's got one vote, majority rules. And they voted by one vote to let us have the letters. But we've stayed in contact. She's died. In fact, we went to her funeral. She was almost 100 years old. Married in Oakland City beside her son with her husband. So I want to read to you the last letter that he wrote to his mother. And this is interesting because all his other letters are talking about how cold it is and how hard it is and how dangerous it is and how much they're marching and all the fighting. But in this letter, he's talking about being in a safe, warm place. It's raining outside the bunker he's in. And he's in a bunker along one of these trenches that the Chinese had dug that they're occupying. And he's looking out across this valley, and he's just thinking about life. And he writes this to his mother, and I think he knew what was going to happen because he says, you know, you are supposed to regret what you played around, that you played around and didn't study hard in high school, but I don't feel that way at all. Love, Bud. And that was his last letter. Questions? Yes, sir.
I had a question whenever I was reading the article.